Hello, everybody, and welcome to Forget Your Password, Voice Cloning, MFA Attacks, and Our Passwordless Future, a webinar by LMG Security. My name is Natalie Bray, and I'm your moderator for today. Our presenters for the webinar today are Sherry Davidoff and Matt Duran. Sherry Davidoff is the CEO of LMG Security and the author of 3 books, including Data Breaches, Crisis, and Opportunity. She is a certified penetration tester and forensic analyst and a graduate of MIT. Sherry has been called a security badass by the New York Times. And Matt Duran is the director of training and research at LMG Security, as well as a Black Hat USA instructor. He holds his computer science degree from the University of Montana, and his malware research has been featured on NBC Nightly News. Sherry and Matt are co-authors of the new book, Ransomware and Cyber Extortion. At this time, Sherry, I'm going to pass you control of the webinar.
Thank you so much, Natalie, and it's such a pleasure to be on this webinar, especially because authentication, the way we verify someone's identity, is so important. It underlies every single other part of our cybersecurity programs. And that's why you'll see throughout the year, we are always referring to topics that come up during this presentation. So today we're going to do a deep dive into really all things authentication, starting with the password problem, and we'll use 23andMe as a case study there. We will do a demonstration of voice cloning. Voice cloning is about to change the world. It's about to change cybersecurity in particular. So for years, we've been relying on the ability to biometrically authenticate somebody over the phone. When Matt calls me, I know it's Matt because it would be very hard to sound like Matt. Turns out it's a lot easier than you might think. So we have a secret demo. I'm not going to tell you whose voice we're going to clone. It's a surprise. Microsoft has rolled out some new multi-factor authentication enforcing policies as of this week, and so Matt's going to dig into that piece of it. And he's also going to show you how hackers bypass multi-factor authentication and what they currently don't bypass as easily. We'll talk about techniques for streamlining your authentication, making it easier for users, because of course, when it's difficult, people will try to get around it. And finally, we'll talk about better types of authentication. The future is now biometrics, passkeys, and more. And that's going to help us have more secure infrastructures, also more secure and easier e-commerce experiences as well, something that a lot of people are seeing for the first time this holiday season. So let's jump right in. One of the big cases in the news, of course, right now is 23andMe. So 23andMe has announced that hackers have access data at this point of up to 7 million users, which is shocking. And one thing that's important to understand is that it's not that 23andMe themselves was directly hacked, right, Matt? This happened because a certain subset of users was hacked, and those users are connected to other users. And however, times are changing. You know, 3, 4, even 5 years ago, if a large number of users had their accounts hacked, that would be viewed as a user problem. And now the company themselves ends up in the news because of it. So that's a really important change, that you could end up being liable if your customers are using passwords that have been stolen or that are weak. So here's what's happening. The genetic information stolen from 23andMe is now for sale, and you can change your credit card number, but you can't change your genetics. Once it's out there, it is out there. Here you can see hackers are offering 100 profiles for $1,000, 100,000 profiles for $100,000. They're making some good money off of this. And Matt, I know we were talking earlier, we're also starting to see them create data products, right? They're offering sets of data that are specific to certain ethnicities. And so that's something that I think is also going to be a trend, where the hackers are now mining that data and starting to sell products that are useful for different types of entities. Anything you want to add on that? I know you've been following this.
No, we'll get into the details on it here a little bit later in the presentation. But yeah, it's a strange new twist in what we would normally consider to be a personal data breach. We don't normally think about someone stealing our genetic information as being in that kind of realm. But as it turns out, that is a very valuable product for quite a few reasons.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the lawsuits shake out on this one. So again, all of this started with credential stuffing. 23andMe has been very clear that they weren't hacked, the accounts were hacked. And that is a really important point. So what is credential stuffing? Of course, it's been a trend the past few years. Criminals steal your passwords or they buy them from the dark web, often in bulk. So for example, the LinkedIn database with 164 million stolen passwords, these are taken from LinkedIn, that is circulating around the dark web, often available for free. At LMG, we actually use it sometimes in our penetration testing to see if passwords are available, publicly available. So it's very freely accessible to hackers. And then they can take those passwords and try to log into 23andMe or try to log into your online banking. And often when people change their passwords after a breach, number one, they make them weaker. Some studies have shown that that's the case. Or you might just add like a 1 or a number or change spring to summer or something like that. And hackers have automated tools that will try variants of these stolen passwords as well. So that's how credential stuffing works. They have automated tools to do that. And as a result, they were able to get into about 14,000 23andMe customer accounts. Now, stolen credentials are a top cause of breaches. 74% of organizations have reported that they've experienced a cyber breach in the last 12 months. This is a report from Hyper that did a survey. 82%, the majority of them, attributed this to credential abuse. So hackers stealing passwords and then misusing them in order to gain access to resources where they should be unauthorized. 3 of 5 organizations were breached because of credential misuse or authentication weaknesses. So how can we protect ourselves from things like credential stuffing in particular that hit 23andMe? Well, first of all, we need to be choosing a strong password. And this is where I want to back up and say the definition of a strong password has changed. Many of you, when you think of a strong password, you think, oh my gosh, it has to be really complicated with numbers and letters and symbols and 20 billion characters and squirrel noises like that old Dilbert comic. No. In fact, our own federal government here in the US has come out and said they don't need to be complex. In fact, that makes it difficult for them to memorize, which means it's more likely that people will reuse them or you end up going through extensive password reset processes. So instead of thinking about complex passwords or changing your passwords regularly, we want to be focusing on unique passwords, a different password for every important service that you use. And the reason this is so important is because you never know when a service is going to get hacked, when a cloud app is going to get hacked. You may not find out for weeks or months or even years that your password has been stolen until it is too late. So we want to make sure we're using a unique password for every single website that we use. You also want it to be long just because longer passwords are more difficult to guess, more difficult to crack. So it doesn't have to be complex, it needs to be unique and long. So take a look at your organization's password policies as well. If you are still requiring complex passwords, it might be time to revisit that policy because again, as our federal government says, it reduces our ability to memorize secrets, which means you're more likely to be going through password reset practices regularly. Those are expensive, they're costly, and they have weaknesses in and of themselves. I put a link to the NIST document on this, 800-63. If you have questions, drop me a line on LinkedIn and I can point you to the relevant section. Okay, if you get stressed out, raise your hand if you're stressed out thinking about memorizing or thinking about picking a unique password for every single website that you use. That just stresses me out. That is because the human brain is not designed to remember passwords. And so in order to get around it, we end up reusing passwords or coming up with patterns for our passwords that are really easy to guess if a hacker figures out just even a couple of them. Unfortunately, 58% of people report that they memorize their passwords. And that results in passwords like this, where again, you're reusing the same password or a basic password and maybe changing it up a little bit for your work or something especially important. And again, that really just opens the door for attackers. The good news is that password managers can help with this. Password managers are one of the most effective band-aids we have for the whole password problem. I'm not going to say it's really a solution. It's not getting to the underlying issue, but it does allow you to not just store unique passwords, but also use those password generating options. So here you can see Dashlane. We're generating a unique password in Dashlane. Just looking at this password stresses me out until I remember I don't have to type this manually. You can have the Dashlane app on your phone. You can have the Dashlane app on all of your various computers and systems. And while there is risk to keeping all of your passwords in one place, keeping all your eggs in that one basket, it is less risky than picking weak passwords. So check it out. There's a few popular options that we put on the screen: Dashlane, 1Password, Bitwarden. There are plenty of others. They're low cost. They may even be free for personal use. If you do use a cloud-based password app, remember to use multi-factor authentication for that login. Passwords are a pain in the neck. Matt, you pulled these statistics actually. I thought that they were interesting. Anything jump out in particular to you?
Yeah, I mean, what really jumps out to me, and this comes from a background that I've had of working in a help desk role at one point in my cyber career. Employee password resets, or password resets in general, are time-consuming and expensive, and they are very, very frustrating. And we can actually see, again, this is from the Hyper report. There's a metric behind that. We're looking at about $375 per employee per year wasted on nothing but password issues by themselves, resetting passwords, having password secrets reset, having MFA reset. I mean, there is a large glut of unnecessary spending if we just use better practices for how we authenticate our users. And this isn't just for your corporate environment either. This happens in e-commerce as well. This costs companies money because customers don't want to continue shopping if they can't remember something like their password for a website. So by moving into a better solution, by moving a little bit closer to that rosy passwordless future that we'll talk about here in just a little bit, we actually end up saving ourselves a lot of time, hassle, and money as we go.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked a little bit about password managers. I wanted to mention a feature that's really becoming prevalent within some popular password managers. Again, this is Dashlane, and you'll notice that we see a security alert here: update your master password. During a routine dark web scan, we found evidence that breaches to other websites may have compromised your master password. And they also sometimes have alerts for other passwords that are stored in the system. So this is a new benefit of password managers, where they will tell you if doing research on the dark web, they will tell you if they come across a password that appears to be from your account. So that will help protect you against credential stuffing attacks. Anytime you see someone advertising a dark web scan, remember that it's not actually possible to scan the entire dark web. We have a whole YouTube video on this, how the dark web works. Check it out. But because of that, if you don't see an alert that your password has been stolen, that doesn't mean it hasn't been stolen. We can't say for sure if something is on the dark web or not, because it's not possible to check every corner. Okay, so Matt, why don't you walk us through how exactly the hackers stole millions of customers' data from 23andMe, and then we can talk about some of the ripple effects of that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad we get to dive back into this, because it really does showcase kind of what kind of risk you were putting yourself under when you are using these online services and not following just basic good password hygiene. Initially, hackers were able to break into, using stolen, weak, or reused credentials, about 14,000 accounts inside of the 23andMe system. Now, that by itself is pretty bad, but there is a linked DNA relatives feature that's available inside of the 23andMe app, and there are other lineage applications that offer something similar to this. Using that feature, they were able to expand from that 14,000 account initial hack out into millions of other accounts. And this was what really led to the loss of all of this data. Hackers actually began targeting very specific lineages inside of 23andMe as their initial targets. And of course, this blew up into basically trying to get everyone they possibly could. But initially, they came out on hacker forums with the data of about 1 million Ashkenazi Jewish heritage members as a specific target. They then went on to target about 300,000 Chinese members of the application. And then, of course, they cascaded downward from there. You can see celebrities, you can see people from all around the world at this point. But this is really how it started. Now, because of this, there have been some changes to 23andMe's policy. Of course, they are potentially in the midst of a class action lawsuit over this data loss at this point. And because of that, or potentially because of that, there's not a direct attribution here, their terms of service actually updated recently. So they did a couple of things. They changed their dispute period from 30 days up to 60 days, and they added a rider into their end user license agreement that pushes any litigation against them into small claims court. This means that you wouldn't really be able to file a class action lawsuit against them. This also means that disputes are conducted privately with 23andMe. You have to go through their arbitration process, but you're not locked into this. As with many other end user license agreement updates, you've got 30 days to opt out of this and still be under their old system of license agreement rules. But it is something that we'll see as a change moving forward, with probably not just them, but other organizations that handle this kind of data moving forward.
Yeah, very timely, Matt. Thanks for the heads up on that for anybody who's interested. Okay, so we can't wait for our passwordless future. Passwords, as we've seen, are quite a pain, and they're becoming less and less effective over time. But as we're going to talk about towards the end of this presentation, many major companies have banded together to really expand support for passwordless authentication, which is both more secure and more convenient. That's what we want to hear. So there's happy, fluffy bunnies and sunshine and rainbows ahead in our future, and even in our present in some cases. So in the meantime, what do we need to do? We need to be using multi-factor authentication. I'm pretty sure I've used this in every single presentation we've had, Matt.
You're
I feel
probably
like
right.
I should get a prize if we use it in everything next year. So of course, authenticate means to verify someone's identity, and in security, we do this in one of three ways: with something you know, like a password, or your mother's maiden name. Some of these are better than others. Something you have, like your phone or like a driver's license, and then something you are. So something you know, something you have, something you are, like a fingerprint, biometrics. When we're using multi-factor authentication, we're just using more than one method combined. And one of the reasons this is so important is because passwords stink. And so really you need that belt and suspenders, or your pants are just gonna fall down in this case. We really need to make sure multi-factor authentication is deployed consistently. When we see breaches happening, it's usually because, oh, multi-factor authentication was employed, except we turned it off for the CEO. There was like an exception or something like that. And as a CEO myself, I know that you don't want anything to get in the way of executives' work, but it's really important for your executive team to understand that their security is just as important. In fact, your executives are going to be targeted, anybody who's a public figure. Speaking of targeting public figures, voice cloning is here. Yesterday, I actually talked to someone who, for the first time, was directly impacted by a voice cloning scam. One of her grandfather actually reported that her brother had called him and needed some money, and it turned out it was a scammer that was using voice cloning to try to convince him that it was actually his grandson. So, and one of the reasons this worked is because her brother was a public figure and has a lot of voice and video out there. Now, you don't need much. It only takes about a minute of audio. So on the screen here, we see one example from last month of voice cloning used in an actual scam. So in this case, the scammers called an 82-year-old man, and they said that they were the police and that Michael was in trouble. And then they put Michael's actual voice, a cloned version of his voice, on the phone briefly and said, I need help, or something along those lines. And so the 82-year-old man said, you have the quote on the screen here, "I heard Michael's voice. I thought I was talking to Michael." So that's just one example. We are in the early days of these scams, but they are already starting to clone voices. So let's see how we do it. As we talked about back in October, voice cloning is fast and free. And today we're going to take it to the next level and actually show you an example of how it works. So we ended up using a tool called 11 Labs. 11 Labs is great. You can clone audio on the fly. All you need is about a minute and a half of somebody's audio. So in this case, I actually went with a video of someone who I work with quite a bit. Haha, Matt. We decided to clone your voice. Pretty soon you won't even need to be here at all. So we got about a minute sample of Matt's audio, which is easy to do because he chitter chatters a lot. And then we uploaded it to the system. And when I say we, I mean that also means our new intern, Lauren. So I want to say a big thank you to Lauren, who really dug into the voice cloning demonstrations and helped us understand how the system worked and get some good voice clones. So also I want to mention that scammers often target new employees like Lauren. And so our scammer is going to call Lauren in this case and try to get Lauren to do something. So let's see how that works. All right, so here's a system where we've already trained it. We've uploaded about a minute and a half of audio from Matt. And then we can type in any arbitrary message that we want Matt to say.
This is Matt. Can you do me a favor? I need you to run out really fast and get $1,000 worth of Apple gift cards. Just text me the card numbers so I can send them to our remote team as a bonus. Thanks. I appreciate you.
Aw, that's so nice, Matt. So imagine
did you get me the gift cards or what?
Right? Come on. Sorry, she didn't listen. So imagine a new employee getting not just a text message, but a call from your CEO or a call from their boss. Your intern gets a call from the boss saying, hey, I need you to go out and do this. It's really effective. It's really frightening, and it is going to change the way we work. If you have even a minute or a minute and a half of audio anywhere out there on the internet or on social media, assume that your voice can be cloned and protect against it. So let's talk about some of the potential threats to businesses. Right now, this is being used by scammers. They find a public figure, they figure out who their grandparents are. This has happened multiple times now. They'll call that person and try to scam them out of money. So this is really targeting individuals. We will undoubtedly see this rolled out towards businesses soon as well. So imagine, here's a few examples. Someone could pretend to be the CEO or pretend to be the CFO and direct your staff to do something or put out something embarrassing. These scammers could call and pretend to be customers. Hey, I need you to move money, or I want to get my account information. And sometimes your team has a very close relationship with customers they've been working with 10, 15, 20 years. And so they're using, even though maybe there's supposed to be other methods, they're really just using voice recognition, especially if it's coming from a number they recognize. And I want to flip ahead for a second because it is very easy to spoof caller ID. At LMG, we do social engineering testing all the time. So we call people within your business and test to see if they will give sensitive information out over the phone or if they'll take actions based on what we're telling them to do. And I can tell you that it's easy for us to do caller ID spoofing, and when that number is recognizable, people are much more likely to trust the person calling. According to the FBI, there's an increasingly prevalent tactic by bad actors of spoofing legitimate business phone numbers to confirm fraudulent banking details, blah, blah, blah. So they are using these very common tools. You might also have scammers trying to contact your bank and pose as a member of your team, again, using caller ID or voice recognition. So think about that relationship you have with vendors, with bankers, with your customers. And if someone takes that next step to authenticate you in a different way, embrace that, because this is really happening and all of us are going to be targets. How can we protect ourselves? Number one, we need to be conducting cybersecurity training and awareness. So some critical topics that we need to think about today are voice cloning, phone-based social engineering. So as you are going through and reviewing your monthly training, for those of you that are doing on-demand training, make sure you're including the latest threats. And phone-based social engineering is one of the latest threats. At LMG, we do managed on-demand training with KnowBe4, and I can guarantee you that phone-based scams are going to be highlighted in the next quarter. So make sure that you are including that. And then set up a process where you're carefully verifying callers all throughout the organization. There's places where we don't really authenticate callers because we've never needed to before. Hey, my coworker just called me. My boss just called me. You need to set up the scenarios which should trigger extra authentication. Scenarios like, oh, you want me to move money? You want me to disclose information about invoices or whatever. So think about what are those scenarios that should trigger an alarm bell. And then how are you going to have them authenticate? So a really low-tech way to do that is just call the person back at a number that you know is legitimate. So that callback technique is actually very effective, very low-tech. Just don't call a number on an email or something that the scammer could have given you. Call a number from your directory or something that you know is legitimate. Right now, you could also consider video verification for those of you that use Teams or Zoom. The scammers will sooner or later get good at faking video, but we're not quite there yet the way we are with audio. So for now, video is still a decent method to authenticate people. Be cautious anytime you're using knowledge-based authentication, whether it's a secret code or anything else that, or trivia questions about people like what's your favorite color, what's your mother's maiden name. Those are things that could be stolen or guessed or phished. So just be very cautious. Knowledge-based authentication is better than nothing, but definitely a risky method to verify someone's identity. And the big one that I want to talk about is using an MFA app. Actually using an MFA app to verify callers. So I'd be curious to know how many of you are doing this. Right now, we see this a lot in call centers, for example, in the financial sector. So a bank's call centers or some other larger organizations' call centers might verify callers using an actual multi-factor authentication app. So Matt, do you want to talk through how Caller Verify works? This is just one example. There are other tools, but Caller Verify is very popular and it can integrate with both Okta or Duo.
Yeah, Caller Verify is actually a really handy tool if you are operating a large-scale call center, and they're one of the more popular variations of this kind of security verification system out there. Realistically, how it works is pretty basic. I mean, the calls are going to start off roughly the same. They're going to go through, the caller's going to contact you. They're going to go through some of those initial questions just to essentially verify that it is a legitimate phone call at the very least. And then there is a second factor prompt that will be sent out to an authenticator application on that user's cell phone. So something like Duo or Okta are very, very popular additions with Caller Verify or Phonebook, one of the other applications we see out there very frequently. But it allows for a very secure second factor. One, it's going to go to that user's individual cell phone, and two, most of those authentication apps also rely on biometric authentication on the phone to actually approve a request. So once we hit that second factor and we have approved it on the line, then we can either verify and the agent can proceed with the call as they see fit, or we're not verified and we know that we've got a problem here. We can relate this out to a fraud team, or we can flag an account for follow-up if we need to. Either way, it's a great move forward that doesn't rely on something that's easily phishable or researchable like knowledge-based authentication, which, while okay, is not the best way of actually verifying someone.
Yeah, so if you get a lot of inbound calls from customers, for example, or other outside parties, using an app like this may be an effective solution for you. All right, so we know multi-factor is important, and what we're hinting at here is that some multi-factor authentication is more effective than others. So any multi-factor authentication is better than no multi-factor authentication, right? So if you just have a password and that's it, that is bad. That is risky. Better is a password and a text message, or a password and voice. However, as we've seen, voice-based authentication and also anything that relies on the public switch telephone network can easily be intercepted. Phones were not designed for security. Text messages are not encrypted and are also not designed for security. And we have seen over and over and over again that scammers are able to find all kinds of ways around it, whether through SIM jacking, where they take over your phone by convincing your telco to port your number to another phone. Hey, I got a new phone. You need to start directing my calls and texts to another place. And then they drain your bank account, and by the time you detect it, your money's gone. The cell network actually has flaws in it. Again, it was not designed for security. And so in Europe, we saw criminals actually redirecting calls and texts and draining people's bank accounts that way. An investigative journalist, Joseph Cox, found that a hacker was able to pay $16 to convince a telecommunications company to start sending copies of his text messages. So because of all of these reasons, we have seen time and time again that text messages and phone calls are no longer considered best practice for MFA. So what's better? They are convenient, they're better than nothing, but better than that are passwords and one-time tokens or hardware tokens, either the app on your phone or a hardware token, even better. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Matt, because even though these are better than text and voice, there are still ways to bypass them. And Matt, I love what you did here. You got a tool that hackers commonly use, and you're going to show us how you capture a one-time passcode very, very easily, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So the tool that we're going to use today is called EvilGenix, and this is a tool that is freely available for pretty much anyone who wants to grab and install a copy of it. And it's used in a lot of cases to create lookalike phishing websites, very realistic and very interactive style phishing websites, not the same ones that you're used to seeing where the logos are all off and the copyright dates are wrong. They use a technique called a man-in-the-middle attack to basically intercept traffic that's being sent back and forth between you and the website that you're trying to interact with. So our goals for this demo are going to be as such. We want to be able to intercept things like usernames and passwords, and we're going to use Microsoft as the example. We're going to make a lookalike Microsoft site and grab data from it. We also want to be able to capture things like cookies and tokens and bypass multi-factor authentication. That's the big one. A regular phishing website can grab your username and password, but if you have multi-factor on the account, Ideally, what should happen is that multi-factor should stop the attacker from being able to log in. We're going to showcase how that's not always the case, and we're going to do that by showing the difference between something like SMS-based multi-factor authentication and then Microsoft's number matching multi-factor system, which is what they're enforcing on a lot of their accounts moving forward. So with SMS enabled, we went ahead and logged into a demo website, and we're of course going to be going after Hack Me Inc. If you've seen our webinars before, you know we love to beat up on Hack Me Inc. They're our favorite target. In this case, we're going to be going after Will Hack, who is one of the members of the IT staff for Hack Me. And in this case, we're going to take him to a phishing website. And you can see the website there in the background. It looks pretty much just like a Microsoft website would look. Realistically, that's because this is Microsoft's website. We're passing traffic through our evil server and over to our victim at this point. So aside from the URL at the top of the page being different, they're really not going to see anything else. When they log in with their username and password, they're going to get that multi-factor identity prompt, and it's going to ask them to verify using a text message on their phone. So once they verify, once they've entered their password and that code, they can log into the account and they can use it like they normally would. But on the back end, let me show you what we got from the hacker's perspective. We picked up not just their username and their password, both are bad. We also know the exact method of MFA that they were using. And you can see down at the very bottom, we intercepted their authorization tokens. That's the big part. Using that, I can now go in, if you watched our webinar on scams and fraud, I can now go into my web browser, I can load that token into my browser, and then I can just log directly into that victim's account. No username, no password, no multi-factor authentication code. I have the entire thing captured at this point. And you can see my success message down from EvilGenix when we move into the next slide. It shows me exactly where I'm going. So I can see the website I pulled it from, I can see the creation time, I can see the password, I can see all of that stuff. This is just a very simple demonstration about how ineffective something like a one-time password can be. We consider these to be phishing prone, and we're not the only ones. There are several ways that attackers go around these exact types of multi-factor authentication. And while they are easy, they don't require any extra software. They can be used with old style flip phones, and they're oftentimes more comfortable because it's something people have been used to for a while. They're really not a great way of verifying any identity over a secure system. Remember that the protocols that are in place for text messaging were enacted back in like the 1980s. This is like 40-year-old technology. And because of the fact that that data has to travel in between multiple cellular networks, means that it's decrypted multiple times along the way, or just not encrypted in the first place to make it easier for that data to move through. So we want to get away from using something like text message as that second factor. Let's see what happens if we use a better form of multi-factor authentication. And I think this is where the demo really gets into kind of the meat of what we're trying to say here. We went ahead and reconfigured Will's account to use number matching through Microsoft. So this is going to be a type of multi-factor that is going to present a number on the screen on login. Now, to get past that prompt, I'm going to need to open up my phone. I'm going to need to biometrically authenticate with my authenticator app, and then I'm going to need to enter that number. Now, this means that from an attacker standpoint, there are two separate pieces of data that they're going to need to be able to get past this prompt. By itself, that's a pretty secure way of enabling multi-factor. The hacker can see the number, but I can't. I can see my app, but the hacker can't. So there's a lot that goes into making this a much more difficult road. However, with this kind of website, I can still go through and I can pass the user through to the website. Similar to what we did with the one-time password, when Will enters his username and password and then enters that number on his app, he's going to go straight through to his account and he's going to log in like he normally would. But let's see the difference on the back end now that I'm using this more secure method of multi-factor. You can see that we still get the username, we still get the password. So this account is at risk. I have compromised data on this account at this point. But what we did not get was that authorization token. We don't have what we would need to actually log directly into that user's account now because we use this more secure and better form of multi-factor authentication. Just like that, we were able to take away a hacker's ability to hijack that account in real time, which is in my opinion, a pretty substantial example of why you should be moving to these more secure methods. It's a no-brainer at this point.
So this is why we want to be using even stronger multi-factor authentication. So in addition to one-time passcodes, the powers that be then also rolled out authenticator push notifications. And you can see an example of that on the screen here, where you just open your app and it pops up and says, approve this sign-in request. You're supposed to only approve it, of course, if it's you. Unfortunately, what we see in the field, and again, we'll do this on our red team tests here at LMG, often it only takes 2 or 3 attempts, and then the user will just approve it because they're annoyed or they're irritated or they're tired or they do it by accident. And once that happens, you have let an attacker in the door and they can run amok most of the time. So for that reason, we are starting to see additional checks like number matching getting rolled out so that it's more than a simple click. You know, we're trying to make the user pause and think about what they enter. Now, it's, again, like Matt said, it's only a matter of time before the criminals find ways around number matching as well and start to integrate that into their tools, but it's an arms race, and for now, it's helping. Okay, so I have heard a rumor that there are still apps out there that do not support multi-factor authentication. Is this right, Matt?
That is right, and it's a sad fact. Yeah, not every application that you use is going to support multi-factor authentication or secure multi-factor authentication by any means. But there are some places you can go to vet your applications ahead of time. If you're looking at bringing in a new service into your environment, adding something like a chat client, a finance app, a social media app, or something like that, it's probably good to know ahead of time whether or not that's going to comply with your organization's security standards. And that can be kind of a difficult thing to do at times. Lucky for us, there are services out there. This is one called the 2FA directory that we found that will actually list off what kinds of multi-factor popular applications support and what they don't support. So if you're looking at using something like Slack as an example, we can see Slack right up here at the top of the page. We can see that it does support multi-factor authentication. It supports both SMS and software-based MFA. So that's a pretty good one. However, if there's an application that you want to use for really any reason, like TeamSpeak down here at the bottom, we can see that they don't support MFA. And for those that don't, we actually have, through the 2FA directory, a very nice and easy method of contacting that software vendor and suggesting to them that they should probably get with the times and support this kind of authentication method. Because if not, because of that big red warning, they're probably going to be losing business because of it. And they won't be allowed inside of enterprise environments because just by virtue of not supporting that, they are a security risk.
Yeah, we often get the question of what do you do if a cloud provider does not support MFA? And at this point, I used to say, well, talk to them. At this point, if they don't support any MFA, run screaming, or at least have a serious, sit down conversation with them and with the rest of your team about how important they are. That said, this kind of tool is really helpful because the type of MFA you support these days matters as well. So if there is a cloud app that only supports SMS or that only supports email, that's something that probably should raise a red flag, and you might want to talk to that vendor to see if it's in their roadmap at a minimum to support stronger methods of MFA. And if you can't wait that long because you have highly sensitive data or something along those lines, you may need to consider alternatives. So Matt, I know this is a big week in multi-factor authentication news. You want to fill us in?
It is. So this is just another one of those indicators that large software vendors and hardware vendors out there are moving towards enforcing multi-factor authentication as just a baseline for things like your online tenants. Microsoft just this week started rolling out a new series of conditional access policies, and this is going to go all the way through the Microsoft environment for every single user. What they're doing now is enforcing the use of multi-factor authentication, specifically strong multi-factor authentication, for any login to any administrative portal in their systems. This is going to include Azure, it's going to be the Exchange dashboard, the M365 portal, anything that will allow you to make significant or substantial changes to one of Microsoft's services is now going to require by default that you use a secure form of multi-factor every time you log in. Personally, I think this is a good thing. Other people may disagree with me, and Microsoft understands that. So if this is not something that you want in your Microsoft tenant, you have to manually turn this off within 90 days of it rolling out. Otherwise, it's there to stay. So again, if this is something that you're concerned about, or if you don't already have multi-factor enabled, which realistically you probably should, you can go in there and you can disable this feature and make it more of an on-demand offering. However, I would recommend just sticking with it.
Yeah, we're not telling you to do this necessarily.
Yeah, exactly.
You can just wait this out. You don't have to take action, and then you will be more secure, which is kind of nice. Yeah. But just be aware that this change is occurring.
Yeah, and it'll be tenant wide. So every Microsoft customer will be affected by this within about the next 3 months.
So Matt, I know we talked about the fact that there's sunshine and rainbows and bunnies in our future. Tell me about that. And some of them are here too. They're here today.
Yeah. Yeah, some of them are already in use. In fact, I use some of them right now. They're really nice ways of authenticating with a system without having to remember the password, because just like everyone else. Yeah, I despise passwords. I think they're terrible. Don't get me wrong, I use long, secure passwords for everything, but I don't like having to type it in every time I go to a web service. So let's talk a little bit about passwordless authentication, because this is really where we're going as a security culture. We want to be able to get away from that reliance on remembering passwords, on using password managers, things like that. One of the best ways that we can go about doing that, especially right now, is through the use of what's called a pass key. And a pass key basically combines all the things that make the blockchain secure, along with what makes authentication secure in the first place. And what we're really talking about here is going to be public key cryptography. We have a webinar on this if you'd like to take a look at it. But what we're using is a device that we already have, know, and trust that we can authenticate with biometrically, not having to use a username or password. And that can basically be our key into multiple services. There's a couple different large-scale vendors out there who are already rolling this out for or on a large scale. One of them being Apple. So Apple is operating under the Apple Passkey model right now. This is based on a couple of standards that are pretty well known in security circles and are becoming well known among other technical circles. But they're based on the FIDO standards and the W3C standards. We'll talk about these a little bit as we go through. But it replaces the need for a password with a public and private key pair, an encryption key pair. The same way that you would sign an email can now be used to log into an online service. And this is a great way of going about things. It means that we never have to give our sensitive information out. We never have to type in a password. We are sending keys back and forth in a public and private pair. And the public key can be owned by anyone. It doesn't matter who has access to that, because we are the only ones who have the private key, and that's what makes this secure.
Yeah, and for those of you, I know we're referring to other webinars, and that's because we've been building on this all year, but if you want a deeper dive, check out our webinar, How Encryption Works. And that's where we talk about the fact that public-private key encryption, you have a pair of keys, and what one key signs, the other key verifies. So that means you can have one key on your phone that you keep very, very secret, and one key that anybody has, which they can use to verify that it was in fact you. And so really having this key on your phone and then using your fingerprint or your face to unlock your phone is a very secure and very convenient method of authenticating.
It really is. Now, we get a question a lot about what happens, because we're now relying on a secondary device. What happens if we lose or have our device stolen? Because cell phones get lost, cell phones get broken, people drop them in mud puddles. I mean, it does happen. So if you're looking at rolling out something like this inside your environment specifically, a couple quick recommendations. One, make sure that you have an easy method for your users to report that something has gone wrong with their device or that it's been stolen or something like that. Bring your own device implementations especially can be very, very unpredictable. You may not know the exact model or type of phone that you're working with, and basically just plan ahead for this to happen. Make sure that the users know how to report that this has been lost or stolen, how to get a hold of your IT staff, how to get those keys reset for their access into the environment, and then ideally have a method in place to wipe any sensitive data off of that device if it is in fact in the hands of someone who shouldn't have access. To continue moving away from using passwords, we can also make things easier on ourselves by deploying something like single sign-on. And single sign-on is a great way of making your employees' lives easier. There's a few different reasons for that. We're going to leverage an identity provider, something like Azure, something like AWS, to basically maintain the identities of the people that we're working with, and then we can pass those identities back and forth to different applications. This means that when a user logs into to your system, because remember, users log into lots of different online services every day, they only really have to log in once. They can log into their single sign-on portal, and then based on using their multi-factor app and everything else, they can log directly into any other vital application they need to get to. It also, from a security standpoint, means that you as an IT administrator would have the access to either allow or deny access. So if you lose an employee, if you bring on a new employee, it's very easy to add them into their new systems without a bunch of new passwords or authentication systems being put into play. Really, we're doing this so we can get away from that something you know section. We've been hinting at this the entire webinar. We want to get away from having to remember passwords. And there's a few reasons why. We want to get away from password fatigue. This is what makes passwords bad in a lot of cases. If we have to reset passwords every 30 days or every 90 days, if we just don't like it, we're probably going to fall into a pattern where we reuse the same kind of structures for passwords, or in a lot of cases, I had to deal with this in system administration a lot, people would just use the same 3 passwords and just cycle them over and over and over again, which is not a secure way of going about things. It's also much faster, which is really nice. There's a definite increase in productivity by using a central authentication protocol like this. And we also minimize password sharing, and we reduce those supporting costs. We talked about $375 per user per year for password resets. Something like a single sign-on system can greatly reduce that. We also want to make sure we're using a good identity and access management system. And there are lots of great options out there. In fact, most of you are probably using one of these already.
Yeah, I think
like
one of the big misconceptions with IAM is that it's like a thing that we can plug into our network. And it's not. It's really that collection of tools and processes that we use to manage identity and to lock down access. So it's a collection of systems.
It really is, yeah. And it's really nice too, because a lot of these integrate with third-party applications. If you jump to the next slide, we did a MFA Day presentation a couple of years back where we went through in detail how to set this up. And one of the ones that we got the best response back on was Duo. Duo actually makes this a very easy system to configure, and it's very, very secure when it's put in place properly. It's also, again, the easy mode for getting people into applications quickly and making sure that they're not losing things like their passwords. So let's talk about progress. So the move towards passwordless is not specific to one hardware or software manufacturer. I mean, this is an industry-wide shift that we're trying to accomplish right now. And one of the big drivers behind this is a group called the FIDO Alliance. So they've developed technical specifications for universal authentication frameworks and universal second factor frameworks. I know those are kind of jumbly industry terms, but really what they're talking about is standardizing how we perform passwordless authentication and making sure that it can run across the board throughout multiple different kind of software and hardware applications. There's a lot of meat behind this group too. I mean, if we want to look at some of the members of the FIDO Alliance, we see big names. We see Amazon, American Express, we see 1Password, we see Microsoft, US Bank. These are big names in the industry, and they are absolutely driving this kind of move forward for a good reason. This is a much more secure method of authenticating. It's a lot easier, it's faster, and it's really just kind of where we want to be. So there's a few principles that we want to look at with FIDO's basic authentication standards. We want to require explicit informed consent for any operation using personal data. We'll talk about where your authentication data is actually stored here as we go through. We want clear context to the user for any FIDO operation. So we don't want this to be a mystery.
What are you telling it to do? Yeah, and exactly. Matt, I think I see here like some of the common questions we get are like, well, don't you get nervous about using biometrics because then you can't change your thumb, everybody's going to have your data? No, one of those core FIDO privacy principles is number 6. Biometric data must never leave the user's personal computing environment. And typically it's set up in a way so that it's not even directly used. Like there's math that's done using your fingerprint or your facial recognition.
Yeah, it's a pretty good way to go about it. And I don't need to read the rest of these off to you guys. We'll make the slides available for download for you so you can go through and look. But yeah, definitely check it out. So we do get a question though, and that is where exactly is this data stored? And each device or sensor that you're using has a unique database file that it's going to use. It's going to be on the device itself, whether this is a YubiKey, whether it's your phone or anything else. So that information never actually has to leave your device. That's one of the big things that we want to talk about. So let's see how this actually works. When we register a FIDO device, something that is going to act as that universal second factor, it's a very, very simple process. We go to the service that we want to, we tell it we want to use FIDO authentication. It's going to send out a notification to our compliant device. So that's probably going to be like a cell phone or something like that. We're going to unlock that with a fingerprint. It's going to generate our public-private key pair. The public key, which anyone can have, is sent back to the application, and the private key stays on your phone. That means that no sensitive data is actually transferred back and forth here. Now, when you go to log in, it becomes even easier. You go to the website, you tell it you want to log in, and the website will send, or the web service will send a challenge to your phone. You put your finger on the fingerprint reader, it selects the appropriate key, it signs that challenge and sends it back to whatever service you're logging into, and because it's got your public key already, it just verifies that you are who you say you are right there. There's no need for a password at this point, and you're into your service without really any kind of fuss or muss at that point. Very, very easy system to use, and your users honestly will probably appreciate something that's this easy. So let's go with one more option here. I wanted to run you guys through a really quick demo of another one of these very, very secure authentication methods, and we decided to go with using a hardware security key. We get questions about this fairly frequently, and this is great for environments where you have users who don't want to use their personal phones for authentication as part of your environment, and that's completely fair. I mean, you're under no obligation to use your personal devices for work, and you really shouldn't be. So this is a good option that works in the meantime. Let's talk a little bit about YubiKey. And we're going to showcase setting up YubiKey inside of Microsoft Azure, just to show you how simple something like this can actually be. All we really have to do if we want to set up a YubiKey as an authentication device is go into our Azure settings, pop into our security settings, go into our authentication methods, and just turn it on. Microsoft and many other vendors are already set up to do this. Yeah, Sherry?
This is something that your IT administrator will do, not the user. So
yeah, exactly.
The IT will go in and set this up.
Yeah, your IT admin will set this up so that you can then register your key, and that part gets very, very easy. All we need to do is select the group of people that we want to use this on, enable it, configure any restrictions we might have, and we're pretty much off to the races. Now, from here, the user can actually do the rest of this on their own. It's a very, very easy process. They log into their Microsoft account, they go into their security settings, which is just right on the front page, add a sign-in method, select the type of security key they want to use. They go through just a couple of quick configuration steps. And now the next time they log in, they'll be prompted to sign in with their passkey. For a lot of these devices, all you have to do is plug it into your computer and then touch the device, and you're logged into your account. Again, all of your authentication data is stored in a very secure encrypted file on that key. In a lot of cases, these are FIPS 140 compliant. They follow FIDO2 standards. These are things you can use for government organizations. They're very, very secure options, and they're really not that expensive. They're very easy to use. So we recommend taking a look at that.
And you can use one security key for a bunch of different websites. That's important. I don't know how many of you used to have like a whole keychain's worth of, RSA tokens and stuff like that, but times have changed.
So yeah, we talked about Apple a little bit already, and we talked about passkeys. Google Biometrics is one of those types of passkey systems that is now being used widely at this point. In fact, Google recently just made this the default for their secure sign-in methods for their services. If you've got an Android phone or an iPhone, you can use this without any additional setup or configuration. It's really easy to do. And it shows why it really is a good example of why we want to go towards this kind of system. One, these are devices that, statistically speaking, about 86% of us already have. So it's nice that we have that right in our pockets. We're usually not that far away from our phones, so we don't need to worry about losing a security key. And the really nice part about this is it is noticeably faster when you sign into a web service. Google actually did some studies on the difference between signing in with something like a simple password and signing in with a pass key. There's a significant difference in speed and efficiency when we go with using a pass key, mainly because, again, it's right there and we just need a thumbprint to make it work. Users definitely do seem to appreciate this when it is implemented correctly. And again, since we're getting rid of the password at that point, we are making things a lot more secure by just virtue of not having that data available for exposure. Now, fingerprints are not the only method of biometrics out there. There's a ton of them. One of the ones that we want to talk about is going to be Hello for Business. And this is one that a lot of people are starting to use just kind of by default. Windows Hello operates either on a fingerprint or on a facial recognition scan. And it is, again, very easy. Oftentimes it's set up by default, especially on things like new laptops. And it uses that same kind of encrypted transmission to make sure that you're not having to put a password out there. Now, we've seen some headlines recently about researchers who are able to get by something like Windows Hello. And I just wanted to talk about this. This is really a warning about sensationalist headlines and how we will see stories that come out like this that will kind of undermine the efficiency of systems like Windows Hello. But it's not necessarily Windows Hello that's the problem. So let's go through this one really quick, and then we'll close out. The headline here doesn't really tell the story. They're just telling you that the fingerprint system was hacked. As it turns out, it was a specific set of hardware manufacturers that had some weaknesses in their actual hardware connections. People were able to basically intercept traffic between something like a fingerprint reader and the computer, replay that traffic, and that's how they were able to get into the computer system. This is not an easy hack. This is not something that someone from the other side of the planet is going to be able to do to you remotely. There was a lot that went into this, but it does show the importance of vetting your hardware just as well as you vet your software as you go. Lastly, we want to talk about things that are starting to affect commerce, and one of them that I've been really interested in is the use of paying with your palm. If you've been to one of the new Amazon storefronts, which I hope some of you have, they're actually very cool. You can pay with your palm as you walk out the door. They have a system called Amazon One that takes a biometric read of your hand, and that becomes your passkey in and out of the store. Very easy, very low maintenance, and it's a very secure way of running a payment transaction through without the need for a credit card.
Sure, you have a long number, you have to keep it really secret, but you have to give it away to everybody. So the nice thing is this is changing, not just in person. It's great we have biometrics, but we have finally started to see change coming to online shopping as well. So you're going to start to see changes based to e-commerce, specifically around authentication, which is great. As Matt mentioned earlier, 39% of online shoppers will often or always abandon their cart because they forgot a password or they're having an account recovery issue. And the most annoying parts of online account registration and login, and this is scientific, are passwords that have specific requirements or forgetting their passwords. So let's all make our e-commerce experience easier and more secure at the same time. The major card brands have all banded together and come out with something called click to pay. One of the reasons for this is that while we have for years been deploying the chip, which makes it harder to conduct fraud in person, there's still that long secret number that everyone's typing into e-commerce sites. And then when a merchant gets hacked, they can potentially skim or steal those card numbers. So now we want to get rid of card numbers entirely, and we want to get rid of usernames and passwords as well, because that is another way that criminals are breaking in and using your stored authentication information. So the whole point of click to pay is, number one, supporting passwordless checkout. That's right, being able to buy stuff without having to type in a password. That's done by authenticating your device using things like passkeys or similar. Also, the system supports tokenization, meaning your credit card number is replaced with information that is not as sensitive and can't be reused to steal your money. So that means it's a faster, more convenient, and more secure checkout process, not just for you, but also for the merchant themselves, any small businesses or large businesses that don't have to be processing card numbers. Okay, here's an example from Visa's site. Checkout with fewer clicks, easy, smart. So they're really selling this. Just to go back, this is a nice diagram from Amex that shows how that customer device gets registered in the system, and then the merchant goes to check out. And there's a whole back-end communication between the merchant and the card brands to authenticate that user without having to have a passcode at all. If you're curious, again, click to pay is not an open source standard. It is actually a collaboration from the card brands that are behind this and are rolling it out globally. So that's really helping to fuel adoption. So look for that logo. When you see an e-commerce site that has that logo, that means that you will be able to use click to pay. And for those of you that have e-commerce options, make sure that you're supporting click to pay. It should be easy to deploy, and that will help to make you more secure. So again, the good news, oh, I forgot to put fluffy bunnies and stars and sunshine on here, but really the future is here. We have better security that's getting rolled out. It is more convenient. It is passwordless. So really we just need to learn to embrace that new technology. So my challenge for you this week is go out, try some new method of authenticating or paying for something that you've never tried before, whether it's click to pay, tap to pay, some kind of new login method with Google. Set it up and try it and see how it works, and tell your friends.
Thank you both, Sherry and Matt, for your wonderful presentation today. Once again, my name is Natalie with LMG Security. We would like to thank everyone who attended today's session. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much, everyone. Again, this is Sherry Davidoff, CEO of LMG Security.
And I'm Matt Duran, Director of Training and Research for LMG Security. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out at any time. We would love to hear from you. You can reach us at info@lmgsecurity.com, find us on LinkedIn, or follow us on Twitter. Thanks again for joining, and we'll see you next time.